Jack had never expected to end up here. The animal shelter smelled like disinfectant and old cages, the hum of distant barks filling the air. It was the kind of place that made you feel like time stood still, where animals waited, some more patiently than others, for a chance at a second life. Jack had never been a big animal person. He'd never had the time for it, not with his demanding job and the constant feeling of being pulled in 1,000 different directions. But today, the world felt different. His life, just a few months ago, had been full of noise. But now, after the sudden loss of his wife, Laura, it was eerily quiet. Jack hadn't realized how much he'd relied on her laughter and presence until it was gone. Now, the silence in their home felt suffocating. So, when his therapist suggested getting a dog, Jack had agreed without much thought. He needed something, anything. Walking into the shelter, the walls of the building felt cold and impersonal. A long row of cages stretched in front of him, each one containing a dog with eyes full of hope, or in some cases, resignation. Jack paused in front of one cage in particular. A scruffy dog lay curled up in a corner, his body frail, his fur graying around the muzzle. He didn't bark or jump up to greet Jack like the others. Instead, his eyes were tired, distant. "Hey there, buddy," Jack said softly, crouching down to meet the dog's gaze. The animal didn't move, his head merely lifting to glance at Jack with a look that was almost too calm. The shelter worker, a young woman with a gentle smile, appeared beside him. "That's Reggie," she said quietly, noticing his interest. "He's been here for a while. He's older and he's not really one to get excited. He's had a rough past." Jack nodded, his eyes never leaving the dog. Something about the way Reggie's eyes seemed to carry the weight of many years struck him deeply. "What's his story?" Jack asked, his voice softer now, almost reluctant to disturb the dog's quiet world. The woman paused, her expression shifting. "He was found as a stray about a year ago. We think he's around 10, maybe older. He doesn't really trust people anymore. But he's gentle. He won't bite." She smiled faintly. "He just needs someone to see him for what he is. A good dog who's been through a lot." Jack hesitated. He didn't know what drew him in. Maybe it was the sadness in Reggie's eyes. Or maybe it was the fact that this dog didn't demand anything from him. He wasn't looking for affection or attention. He just sat there, existing. "Does he have a collar?" Jack asked. The woman nodded. "Yes, but it's not much. Just a simple tag." Jack leaned closer, and with the worker's help, gently unhooked the brass tag from Reggie's collar. As he read the inscription, he felt a lump rise in his throat. The tag read, "If you're reading this, I was loved once." Jack blinked. The simple message hit him harder than he expected. It was so straightforward, so unpretentious, yet it carried a depth of emotion that almost felt like a cry for help. A reminder that this dog had once been part of someone's life, a cherished companion, before being abandoned or lost. "Is that all it says?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman nodded. "That's it. Whoever had him before must have loved him very much. It's the only thing we know about his past." Jack stood there for a long moment, the brass tag warm in his hand. He hadn't planned on adopting a dog today. He hadn't even planned on being here. But something about the simplicity of that message stirred something deep within him. "I'll take him," Jack said, almost surprised at himself for saying it aloud. The decision felt right, as if it had been made for him. The worker smiled gently. "You sure? He's not an easy dog to take care of. He's not exactly a puppy anymore." "I'm sure," Jack said, his voice firm now. "I think we both need each other." The worker led Jack to the counter, where the paperwork was completed, and within the hour, Jack found himself walking out of the shelter with Reggie on a leash. The dog walked slowly, his movements deliberate, his head held low as if he was still unsure of this new life Jack was offering him. As they reached Jack's car, he paused. "Come on, buddy," he muttered, opening the door. "Let's go home." Reggie climbed into the car without hesitation. He didn't seem excited, but neither did he resist. As Jack drove home, the weight of the brass tag in his pocket felt like a constant reminder of the connection that had just begun. Quiet, unspoken, but undeniable. When they arrived at Jack's house, he opened the door, leading Reggie inside. The house was silent, save for the soft sound of the wind outside. Jack set down Reggie's things near the back door and looked around. It felt like an eternity since he had shared this space with someone. Since he had shared it with anyone. Really? "Welcome home, Reggie," Jack said softly, watching the dog explore the room. Reggie seemed cautious but curious, sniffing at the furniture, his nose brushing over the carpet. He didn't run around excitedly like a young dog would, but there was something calm in his movements. Jack sank into the couch, watching Reggie quietly. He had no idea what was ahead of them, but for the first time in a long while, he felt the stirrings of hope. Maybe this quiet dog had something to teach him, something he needed to learn. As Reggie curled up on the rug by the fireplace, Jack looked at him and smiled. "You're going to be all right here. We both are." The evening passed quietly. Jack didn't expect much from Reggie, and he didn't push the dog to change. But as the night wore on, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something important, something that would grow between them, slowly, silently, but with deep roots. And so, under the dim light of the living room, the man and the dog began their journey together. Neither of them knew where it would lead, but somehow, in that stillness, they both felt a sense of peace. A peace they hadn't known in a long time. The first few days with Reggie were quieter than Jack had anticipated. The dog didn't demand attention, didn't nudge at his hand for petting or wag his tail with excitement. Instead, he seemed content to stay in one place, often curled up by the fireplace, his eyes half closed, watching Jack with a calm but distant gaze. It was almost as if he was testing the waters, seeing if this new life would be different from the one he had before. Jack, for his part, was patient. He didn't try to rush the dog into being something he wasn't ready to be. He respected Reggie's need for space. Jack found himself spending more time in the house than he had in months. After work, he'd sit at the kitchen table, sipping a cup of coffee while Reggie sat nearby, lying in his usual spot by the fireplace. The quiet companionship was oddly comforting. It wasn't the boisterous presence of a dog that needed constant attention, but a calm, steady being who was content in silence. Jack couldn't help but feel like they were beginning to understand each other in their own way, without needing words. One afternoon, a week into their new life together, Jack was reading a book when he heard a soft sound. Reggie was at the door, his head pressed against the window, his eyes fixed on the yard outside. Jack looked up, a little surprised. He had always kept the door closed, unsure of how Reggie would react to the outside world. "You want to go out there?" Jack asked gently, walking over to where Reggie stood. The dog didn't respond but turned slightly to look at him, his gaze soft but knowing. It was the first time he'd ever shown any kind of interest in something outside. With a soft smile, Jack opened the door. Reggie hesitated for a moment, then stepped out into the backyard, his steps slow but purposeful. Jack followed, standing by the door, unsure of what would happen next. Reggie moved to the far side of the yard, sniffing the grass. His body relaxed as if he had done this 1,000 times before. Jack stood at a distance, not wanting to intrude, but there was something oddly moving about watching the dog rediscover the world. As the minutes passed, Jack's heart felt lighter. This was the first time he had seen Reggie show any sign of joy, even if it was in the simplest form of exploring the backyard. It was as if he had started to remember what it was like to be a dog again. "Good boy," Jack murmured, smiling to himself. Reggie's presence had begun to fill the house in ways Jack hadn't expected. As days turned into weeks, Reggie's quiet nature began to slowly unfold in subtle ways. He would follow Jack around the house, sitting nearby when Jack worked or read. He still didn't bark or show outward signs of excitement, but the bond between them grew. Jack learned to recognize the small signs of affection. The way Reggie would rest his head on Jack's knee as he sat at the kitchen table, or the way he'd look up at him with those soft, understanding eyes when Jack entered the room. One Saturday afternoon, Jack decided to take Reggie to the park. The weather was warm, the kind of day when people and dogs alike gathered outside to enjoy the sunshine. Jack had no real expectations. He wasn't sure if Reggie would even want to interact with the other dogs or people, but he felt a gentle pull to try. When they arrived, Jack leashed Reggie and they began walking through the park. The grass was lush and green, and people were scattered around, some jogging, others chatting with friends. Reggie seemed to take it all in without any sign of distress. He walked slowly beside Jack, his gaze scanning the area with a calmness that Jack couldn't help but admire. As they passed a group of children playing near the swings, one of them, a little girl with a tear-streaked face, stepped forward. She had been standing at the edge of the playground, her hands clenched around a stuffed animal, but her eyes were fixed on Reggie. "Can I pet your dog?" she asked hesitantly, her voice soft, almost shy. Jack smiled, kneeling down to meet her eyes. "Of course, sweetie. His name is Reggie." The little girl, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, slowly approached the dog. Reggie didn't move, his gaze soft and steady as the child reached out to him. She touched his fur gingerly at first, but then, as if sensing the safety in Reggie's presence, she wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug. Jack watched, surprised at how Reggie didn't flinch or pull away. He simply stood there, allowing the girl to hold him, his eyes closed as if he were accepting the moment in complete peace. After a few minutes, the girl let go, her sobs turning into quiet sniffs. She looked up at Jack, her face softening. "He's really nice," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Jack nodded, his heart swelling. "Yeah, he is. He's a really good dog." As they walked back to the car later, Jack couldn't help but reflect on the moment. Reggie had never shown an inclination to interact with others before. Yet, today, in the soft quiet of the park, he had allowed a child to find comfort in him without hesitation. Jack felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over him. The dog who had once been so closed off now had a special way of comforting people without saying a word. By the time they got back home, the bond between them felt stronger than it had before. Jack no longer saw Reggie as just a dog. He saw him as a companion who had something to offer the world, a silent, steady presence that could heal in ways words couldn't. The more Jack observed him, the more he understood that Reggie had a quiet kind of wisdom about him, one that didn't require rushing or noise to make an impact. That night, as Reggie lay curled up by the fire, Jack sat beside him, feeling a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. Reggie was still the same dog, but in the quiet of their shared moments, Jack realized that perhaps they were both beginning to heal, just by being there for one another. "Thank you, buddy," Jack whispered softly, running his fingers through Reggie's fur. The dog let out a content sigh, resting his head on Jack's lap. Jack smiled and leaned back in his chair. "Maybe this is what I needed all along," he thought. Quiet companionship without the need for words, and the simple understanding that, in their own way, they were both learning how to be whole again. The weeks turned into months, and as Reggie settled deeper into his new life with Jack, the transformation became more noticeable. The quiet dog who had once been so distant began to open up, not with exuberant energy or playful antics, but in his own gentle, unspoken way. It wasn't until Jack started taking him to different places that he truly understood the depth of Reggie's impact. Not just on him, but on others as well. Started one morning when Jack took Reggie to the local library. He had read somewhere about therapy dogs helping children with reading disabilities, and something about it resonated with him. Maybe Reggie could do this. Maybe Reggie could help others in ways that words couldn't reach. Jack had no clear plan. He simply wanted to see if the dog's calm presence might be the key to something more. The library was quiet as usual, with rows of books neatly lining the shelves. Jack and Reggie walked to the children's section, where a few kids sat at tables, their heads bent over books. Jack, feeling unsure, sat down on one of the nearby chairs, watching Reggie carefully. The dog had always been calm, but this was different. He was now surrounded by new faces, strange sounds, and unfamiliar sights. At first, Reggie didn't react. He simply sat down at Jack's feet, his tail curled around his body, watching the room with those same quiet eyes. Jack began reading his own book, but his attention kept drifting back to Reggie. There was something so peaceful about him, the way he seemed so content in simply being there. A few minutes later, a young girl, about 7 or 8, approached Jack hesitantly, holding a book tightly in her hands. Her name was Sarah, and she had been struggling with reading out loud in school. She would stutter and get nervous, and often the other kids would make fun of her. Today, however, she had a book in her hands, but Jack could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "Is your dog friendly?" she asked shyly, looking at Reggie with wide eyes. Jack smiled. "He's very friendly. Would you like to sit next to him?" Sarah nodded slowly, taking a few tentative steps toward Reggie. The dog, without moving, simply watched her as she settled down beside him. The moment she placed the book in her lap and began to read, Reggie shifted slightly, nudging her hand gently with his nose. She looked at him, then back at Jack. "It's okay, you can read to him," Jack said softly, his voice encouraging. "He's a great listener." Sarah took a deep breath, turning the page and beginning to read aloud, her voice at first shaky but growing steadier with each word. Reggie, in turn, remained still and calm beside her, occasionally resting his head on her knee as if to comfort her. The more Sarah read, the more relaxed she became, her voice becoming more confident and steady as Reggie's presence seemed to calm her nerves. Jack watched in awe, realizing that Reggie had already begun to fulfill a purpose that was so much greater than he had ever imagined. For the next few weeks, Jack brought Reggie to the library every Saturday. Each time, Sarah would arrive with a new book, and she would sit with Reggie, reading aloud, the dog's quiet presence making her feel safe. Other children began to notice, and soon, more and more came to read to Reggie, finding the same calm in his steady gaze. The once distant dog was becoming a therapy dog, not through grand gestures, but through simple, quiet companionship. But it wasn't just the children at the library who felt Reggie's calming influence. Jack started taking him to other places, veteran centers, senior living homes, and even schools. Everywhere they went, Reggie seemed to work his magic without saying a word. In the Veterans Center, older men and women who had seen the worst of life found peace simply by sitting with Reggie, petting his fur, and feeling the weight of their worries lift, even if just for a moment. At a nearby school, Reggie's calm presence helped children who struggled with anxiety. He wasn't there to solve their problems, but to remind them that it was okay to take a deep breath, to be still, to not rush. The quiet way Reggie lived his life became a lesson in how to move through the world with peace, not urgency. One afternoon, after visiting the Veterans Center, Jack sat in the car with Reggie, reflecting on how much they had already accomplished together. He glanced down at the dog, whose eyes were half closed as he lay across the back seat, his breathing slow and steady. "You know, buddy," Jack said softly, looking in the rearview mirror, "I never imagined that you'd be the one teaching me how to slow down. You've got a way about you, Reggie. I can't even explain it." Reggie lifted his head slightly, meeting Jack's eyes in the mirror. For a moment, Jack could have sworn the dog understood exactly what he was saying. As the days passed, Jack started to see a profound change in both of them. Reggie, once so distant and closed off, was now part of a larger world, one that was touched by his gentle spirit. And Jack, who had come into this whole experience unsure of what he was hoping for, now felt a deep connection to the dog. He didn't need Reggie to bark, to fetch, or to perform tricks. All Jack needed was the quiet comfort of his presence, and he had come to realize that that was more than enough. One afternoon, Jack took Reggie to a local school. The principal had asked if they could come and help with a reading program for struggling students. Jack hesitated but agreed, thinking that it might be just another small opportunity for Reggie to bring some peace to a few more kids. When they arrived, the principal, Mrs. Parker, led them into the classroom, where a group of children were seated around a carpet. Some of the students were clearly nervous, their eyes darting to Reggie as he calmly sat beside Jack. Mrs. Parker smiled at the children. "This is Reggie. He's here to help us with our reading today. You don't need to worry. Reggie is a very good listener." One by one, the children took turns reading aloud to Reggie. His quiet, unyielding presence created an atmosphere of calm in the room, and soon, even the most nervous children were reading with confidence. Jack observed them from the back of the room, feeling a deep sense of pride swell within him. He had never thought that a dog, this quiet, calm dog, could have such an impact. As the session ended, Mrs. Parker came over to Jack, her face lit up with appreciation. "Thank you so much. I've never seen these kids so engaged before. It's like Reggie knows exactly how to help them feel comfortable." Jack smiled, looking down at Reggie, who was still sitting calmly at his side. "I think he just knows how to listen." And with that, Reggie continued to heal not only Jack but everyone he met, with nothing more than his steady presence and quiet love. The warmth of the summer sun filtered through the trees as Jack and Reggie walked through the park, enjoying the quiet moments they had grown so accustomed to. It had been several months since Reggie had come into his life, and Jack couldn't imagine his days without the dog by his side. It wasn't just about companionship anymore. Reggie had become a symbol of calm in Jack's life. The dog had taught him to slow down, to appreciate the small moments, and to listen, really listen, to the world around him. But as the days went on, Jack began to feel like there was something more to Reggie's past, something that had yet to be uncovered. There were moments when Reggie would gaze out at the horizon, as if remembering something far away. Jack didn't pry, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the dog had a history, one that was still hidden beneath the surface. One afternoon, as Jack was walking Reggie near the park's entrance, a voice called out from behind them. "Is that really him?" The voice was familiar but distant, tinged with emotion. Jack turned around, surprised to see an elderly man walking toward him, a slow but determined gait in his step. The man's face was weathered, his eyes tired, but there was something unmistakable in the way he looked at Reggie, a recognition that Jack hadn't expected. "Excuse me, do I know you?" Jack asked, his curiosity piqued. The man stopped a few feet away, his eyes never leaving Reggie. He bent down slightly as if studying the dog. "That's him, isn't it? That's Tucker." Jack blinked in confusion. "Tucker? I'm afraid you must be mistaken. This dog's name is Reggie." The old man's face softened, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "No, I'm sure of it. His name was Tucker. He was my son's dog." Jack's heart skipped a beat as the name hit him. "Your son's dog?" he repeated slowly. "But Reggie Tucker was a stray when I adopted him. He didn't have any identification other than that tag." He reached into his pocket, pulling out the brass tag that had been a constant reminder of Reggie's past. He handed it to the old man, who took it with trembling hands. The man's eyes softened as he looked at the tag, his voice growing quieter. This was my son Ben's dog. They were inseparable. Ben had this tag made for him when he was just a pup. Ben passed away a few years ago, and Tucker ran off. We searched for him everywhere, but we never found him. I thought I had lost him forever." Jack felt a lump form in his throat. The realization of what the old man was saying began to settle in. Reggie wasn't just a dog who had been abandoned. He was someone's beloved companion, someone's friend. The connection between the dog and this elderly man was stronger than Jack had realized. "Ben was my only son," the man continued, his voice cracking with emotion. "Tucker was there for him during the hardest times of his life. When Ben came back from overseas, Tucker was the one who helped him heal. They had a bond, a special bond." Jack watched the man, his heart heavy with empathy. "I didn't know," he said softly. "I adopted him from a shelter. He didn't seem to remember much about his past, and I thought he was just another dog who needed a home. But now it makes sense. There's something about him, something so gentle, so steady. I guess I've never really thought about who he was before." The man's eyes welled up with tears. "He's still my Tucker, you know, even if he's been gone for all these years. And now he's here with you, isn't he? He's found another person to love him just like he loved Ben. He knows you now." Jack swallowed hard, looking at the dog who had brought so much peace into his life. Reggie Tucker had been through so much. He wasn't just a stray. He was a dog who had lost someone. And now, in his quiet way, he had found a new home, a new purpose. "I've been calling him Reggie," Jack said, his voice soft. "But I guess Tucker feels like the right name now. I didn't know his past, but I think I understand him a little better now. The old man nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. It's okay, son. I know you've given him love, and he's been through a lot. Just knowing that he's happy again. That's enough for me. Jack smiled gently, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. I think he's happy with me, too. I've learned a lot from him. As the man stood up, he placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. Thank you for taking care of him. He's a special dog. Ben would have been happy to know he found a good home. With that, the man turned and walked slowly away, his figure becoming smaller in the distance. Jack stood there for a moment, the dog by his side, contemplating the conversation that had just unfolded. The life he had imagined for Reggie had just expanded beyond his wildest expectations. This dog wasn't just a quiet companion. He had a legacy, a history, and a family that had loved him deeply. Jack looked down at Reggie, or Tucker, who sat quietly beside him, gazing up at him with those familiar eyes. I guess your past caught up with you today. Huh, Tucker? Jack said with a smile, reaching down to scratch behind the dog's ears. Tucker gave a small, appreciative sigh, resting his head against Jack's leg. In that moment, Jack realized that while Reggie, Tucker, had brought so much healing to his life, he had also left a deep imprint on everyone who had known him. His story, though filled with loss, had now come full circle. He had found a place to call home once more, and Jack would make sure that Tucker's legacy lived on. The bond between them, unspoken but deeply felt, had become something far more profound than either of them could have imagined. And as Jack stood there, watching the old man disappear into the distance, he knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. One where love, peace, and quiet companionship would continue to grow, one day at a time. The days that followed the revelation about Reggie's past felt even more meaningful to Jack. The knowledge of Reggie's true history had deepened the bond between them, and it seemed as though the quiet dog who had entered his life was now teaching him something profound. How to heal, how to move forward, and how to honor the past without being bound by it. As autumn rolled in and the trees began to shed their leaves, Jack found himself reflecting more on what Reggie, or rather, Tucker, had brought into his life. The dog's calming presence was more than just a comfort. It had become a symbol of something greater. Tucker had lived through pain and loss, but he had also found peace and a renewed sense of purpose. And now he was sharing that gift with everyone who crossed his path. One afternoon, Jack was sitting in the park, reading a book as Tucker lay peacefully at his feet. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow across the grass. Jack watched as a few neighborhood children ran past, their laughter filling the air. Tucker remained undisturbed, his tail wagging softly as one of the children stopped and approached. "Can we give him a treat?" the child asked, holding out a small biscuit. Jack smiled, nodding. "Sure, he loves those." The child gently placed the treat in front of Tucker, who sniffed it briefly before taking it from their hand, accepting the offering with quiet grace. It was a simple moment, but it spoke volumes about the connection Tucker had with the community. People had come to know him not just as a dog, but as a quiet presence that brought comfort and joy wherever he went. As the seasons continued to change, Jack noticed more people stopping by the park to visit Tucker. Neighbors would pass by on their daily walks and pause to pet him, or families would bring their children to say hello. It wasn't just the children anymore. Tucker had become a symbol of peace for everyone, a constant reminder of the power of quiet kindness. One day, Jack was sitting on a bench near the park entrance when he had an idea. He stood up, walking over to the small oak tree that had become Tucker's favorite resting spot. The tree had grown tall over the years, its leaves a deep shade of amber now that autumn was in full swing. Jack looked around, imagining a small, simple plaque that could commemorate Tucker's legacy. "What do you think, buddy?" Jack said, glancing down at Tucker, who lay contentedly under the tree. "Would you like a little spot of your own?" Tucker, as always, simply looked up at him with those knowing eyes, as if to say, of course. With the help of a few neighbors, Jack worked on setting up a small area under the tree, placing a wooden plaque at its base. The plaque read, Reggie's Rest Stop, a place for quiet companionship. It was a small tribute to the dog who had become such a symbol of peace in their community. A place where neighborhood dogs could come and take a break, where their owners could stop for a moment of reflection, and where everyone could experience the calming presence that Tucker had so freely offered. It wasn't long before the Rest Stop became a favorite spot for local dogs and their owners. A few people brought small bowls of water, while others dropped by with treats to share. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes about the love and respect that the community had for Tucker. What started as an act of kindness had blossomed into a place of shared peace. A resting place for both dogs and humans alike, where the world seemed to slow down, if only for a moment. Jack spent many afternoons at the Rest Stop, watching the dogs come and go, remembering how Tucker had brought comfort to so many, both with his presence and with his silence. As the years passed, Jack's bond with Tucker deepened, and he often found himself marveling at how much the dog had taught him. Tucker had not only healed Jack's broken heart, but he had helped the entire neighborhood in ways they never expected. Then, one chilly morning, as Jack walked to the park with Tucker, he noticed that the dog seemed a little slower than usual. Tucker's once quick steps had become more measured, and he seemed to tire more easily. Jack's heart sank. He had always known that this day would come, but he wasn't ready for it. Tucker had been his constant companion for so long, and the thought of losing him felt unbearable. They sat together under the oak tree, Tucker resting his head in Jack's lap. Jack stroked his fur gently, the quiet of the morning settling around them. The park was empty, the early morning mist still clinging to the grass. It was the perfect stillness, the kind of quiet that had come to define their bond. That afternoon, Jack took Tucker to the vet for a checkup. The vet confirmed what Jack had feared. Tucker's health was declining. His age was catching up with him, and though he had lived a long and meaningful life, his body was starting to give out. Jack was devastated. The thought of losing Tucker was too much to bear, but he knew that it was time. They spent one last night together at home, sitting by the fireplace, just like they had countless times before. Jack held Tucker close, whispering soft words of gratitude and love. Tucker, ever the quiet companion, simply rested his head on Jack's knee, content to be there, just as he had always been. The next morning, Jack took Tucker back to the park, to the oak tree that had become their special place. There, in the quiet shade of the tree, Jack said goodbye. Tucker passed away peacefully, his body resting beneath the tree that had witnessed so many of their shared moments. Jack buried him there, placing the brass tag, "If you're reading this, I was loved once," on the grave as a final tribute. Tucker's legacy lived on, not just in the plaque beneath the tree, but in every life he had touched. He had taught everyone who met him that sometimes the quietest presence leaves the loudest mark. He had brought healing to Jack's heart, comfort to children at the library, and peace to veterans, all through his quiet, steadfast love. And so, as Jack stood beneath the tree, looking at the spot where Tucker now rested, he smiled through his tears. The dog who had changed his life, the dog who had never asked for anything but a little love, had left behind a legacy of kindness that would live on forever. This story is about the unspoken bond between a man and a dog, showing how love, kindness, and patience can heal not only hearts but entire communities. It reminds us that even the quietest and oldest beings have the power to change lives, leaving a lasting impact that transcends words. The journey of the man and his dog, from simple companionship to therapy and healing, illustrates the profound, sometimes hidden influence of compassion. The story highlights the importance of understanding, patience, and the healing power of presence. It teaches that love doesn't have to be loud or obvious to be powerful. Sometimes, the greatest connections are the quietest ones, and small acts of kindness can ripple outward, touching lives in unexpected ways. It's a reminder that every being, human or animal, has the potential to give and receive love that transforms. We would love to hear your thoughts on this heartwarming story. Please like the video, leave a comment, and share how it made you feel. Your interactions are a huge motivation for us to continue creating meaningful content. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next inspiring story. Every like, comment, and share helps us reach more people and bring more stories to life. Thank you once again for watching and sharing in this beautiful journey with us. Your support means the world. Until next time, stay tuned for more stories that will warm your heart and remind you of the power of quiet love.